Welcome to Mom's Writers Club. My name is Sarah,
I'm Jessica.
and I write contemporary fiction, women's fiction. Um, and Jessica, what do you write?
I write thriller and suspense.
And today we're talking about genre and comps. So, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So just wanted to talk a little bit about the different genres that are out there. We're not going to define every genre because there are so many, but I know that sometimes as a writer, it can be hard to understand what genre you are writing in. So we thought we would talk a little bit about that.
So, genre was always tricky for me. I know it's really not cool right now to kind of harsh on genre fiction, but I was one of those writers, and I know there's some more of you out there who were like, I don't fit in any genre, and I'm just writing what I write, and that whole thing. And that was when I started out,
This
and
is new to me. I can't wait to hear about
oh
this.
yeah, no, I've come to a sort of like pragmatic platonic relationship with genre. Um, I've discovered that it's useful and necessary in many ways, particularly as a marketing tool, and particularly as a kind of a shorthand way to communicate to agents and publishing people, as well as readers, kind of what to expect from your work.
One thing to think about is where it sits in the bookshelf or on a bookshelf in a bookstore.
Right, right. Now, for me, that was kind of interesting because women's fiction doesn't have its own section in a bookstore, right? Like YA does, sci-fi fantasy does, thriller and suspense often does, middle grade and children's books and picture books, they all have their separate, shelf space. But women's fiction, romance does, they have a huge section, right? But women's fiction is kind of blended in there with literary fiction and general fiction and all that, that big range of other stuff. So for me, it's a little bit different than it is for Jessica, who is a suspense writer. But I have kind of come to, like I said, to a pragmatic relationship with the idea that I write women's fiction.
One of the things I think is important when you talk about genre are your genre norms. I think it's important that you are aware of what your genre norms are, whether that is tropes that are common or the beats that are typical. Like a romance novel has very specific beats, and you can certainly stray from that in certain instances. But when you're just getting started, it's good to at least know what they are. So if you're going to break the rules, you break them well, so to say. Okay,
Right?
so I have a story for you all, and I was going to save it for later, but it seems to
Yeah,
fit right.
go for it.
So it's important to know what. So, like, if the genre of suspense is this big, know that there are a lot of subsections. It could be mystery, it could be thriller, it could be domestic suspense, it could be romantic suspense, and they are all a little different. And if you, I've heard that it is okay to just say in a query letter that your book is a suspense novel. It's nice to know what the differences are. And what I would recommend is reading broadly enough in your genre that you kind of know where it fits in your genre. And I was talking to Sarah about this earlier, but when I queried the book that got me my agent, I queried it as a thriller because the main character is certainly in danger at points. And there's like a mystery, but it has more of a thriller slant to it. Most thrillers do have a mystery in them. But what I didn't realize, and what I was slowly getting in feedback on rejections, is that my book kind of switched subgenres in the middle. And that was one of the reasons that I got a couple. Well, I mean, it's at least the reason they gave me when they sent me a rejection. But one agent said, I really love your book, but there's so much, romance in the second half that I'm not really sure how to work with it because I represent thrillers, not romantic suspense. So when Kimberly signed me, she said that one of the things she wanted to do in revisions was to make the book all one genre instead of two. So instead of it being suspense for the first half and then switching to romantic suspense, making it suspense from beginning to end. So kind of defining what genre I was going to be in and making sure the book fit within that.
Mhm.
And there are certainly books out there that break rules, but
Yeah.
you kind of need to be
And
aware of them.
and I just want to tell everybody that when Jessica rewrote that second half of the book, she totally leveled it up. It was awesome. It was so cool.
Yeah, thank you. I was very worried that Sarah would not like the revision because I knew that she liked
I did. I liked
romance.
the hunky bad boy with the
And
tattoo, but
he's still there, it's just a little
he's still
different.
there. I know. But interestingly, when I when I had the call with my agent, Laura Bradford, who represents lots and lots of romance, um, she said to me, she was like, I was totally captivated by this book. I loved this book. And she gushed about it for a while, which was, of course, like, it's like so awesome. But she said basically that she didn't like a lot of women's fiction. Like she didn't, a lot of it didn't resonate with her because it was either too much trauma happening and too much
Yeah,
about trauma, or there just wasn't enough happening. It was like a couple of girls on a beach trip, you
yeah,
know? Um, and so she really felt like my book kind of hit this really sweet spot for her in that it sort of departs some from genre norms for women's fiction. And I'm going to chalk that up to the fact that I didn't think I was writing women's fiction pretty much the whole time I was writing this book. So, there's prodigious swearing. There's a,
how many times is the F word in it?
I haven't done a word search
Over
recently,
100.
but it was like 126 the last. Um, and I mean, I don't really know what else, but it was like it was about enough for her um, without being about trauma. And I felt really strongly, this is just me, I felt really strongly that I wanted to write a book that didn't center around an act of traumatic violence. Like I was looking for drama and tension and conflict without a murder or the loss of a child. And that was a stretch for me because those really are the norms right now in a lot of women's fiction, is that there is some like secret traumatic act of violence that everything kind of rotates around. And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. I think something you said when you were talking about that is something else that's good to mention is that genre norms change over
Yeah.
time. So when I say that I would recommend reading in your genre, I would recommend reading something pretty like coming out now or within the last year if you're trying to understand what the genre norms are.
I totally agree with that. And I want to like encourage everybody to like be their own unique flower.
Yeah.
and and if you find yourself writing something that feels out of like, oh, this seems really different, then if it's a great story, if that's your story and that's really, what you need to tell, then commit.
Definitely. And I know a lot of agents right now are looking for genre bending books. So it's funny because I'm over here saying, know what genre norms are, but that doesn't mean you can't break them.
Mhm.
Gosh, that's kind of a hard in between to find, because your book is categorized as women's fiction, but is definitely different than other women's fiction I've read. This is
So
a hard topic to talk about
I know it's
because
tricky. I
genres are
think
so
that,
like on a spectrum. It's
yes,
not concrete.
yeah. Um, I think if you're like, I want to write romance, then that's awesome. Like really dig in and get to know that genre. If you're like,
Yeah.
I want to write spy thrillers, then really dig in and know what that means. But I was kind of like, I want to write a story. I want to write my feelings. And I didn't know what genre it was going to be. And so for me, genre came kind of after the fact and became a useful marketing and communication
Yeah,
tool, you
that's
know?
interesting. And so Sarah writes women's fiction or contemporary fiction, and I would say it even sometimes has a literary flair to it, just because she has really gorgeous writing. Um, so she kind of used it on the back end as more of a marketing tool, whereas I did the exact opposite. I read all the newer thrillers I could get my hands on, and I wanted something that was totally different than those, but that still kind of, fell within genre norms enough that I thought an agent would be interested in it. And
Mhm.
that's another good point, is you need to kind of find the right balance, but you also need to be writing something different that's not already out there, because nobody wants, a book that's basically already been published.
Right, right. So what would you say is different about yours? I mean, I have my ideas about it, but I haven't read as much.
So I would say my hook is different. It's something I haven't seen anywhere and I can't share it with you guys. I'm sorry.
Well, can you use general terms? Like,
I mean, it's a specific hook that I haven't seen used before. It is, I think we are going to, when we go out with it, probably go like with domestic suspense, but it's doing it differently than it's been done before. I
yeah.
mean, I don't really, it's
Yeah.
hard to say without getting
Well, I think you have badass female characters that are not
thank you.
victimized. Um, I mean,
Kind of.
they sort of are, but they don't take it like that. I don't know. They're wily and tough and I don't feel I don't know. Okay, now I'm losing my
No, I
train
get
of
what you're
thought.
saying. So we're not trying to put anyone down who has had trauma and dealt with trauma, and like it gets into your writing because it's one way of dealing with it.
Totally.
But for me, I don't like talking about it directly. So I have found ways to go about it where I feel like it's in the past, and showing what happens after that. And that's kind of where my characters are at in my book.
Mhm.
And I do think that's a little different. The other thing for me when I write, something that's very common in thrillers and in suspense, is a lot of mental health issues. I have a degree in psychology and I worked as a nurse for a decade and have worked with a lot of people with mental health issues. And I feel like the genre does not do them any favors. It really bothers me the
Yeah.
way people are presented in a lot of these books. Not all of them. Sometimes it's done well, but I feel like it's typically very unrealistic and a caricature of what those mental illnesses actually are.
Right, and it perpetuates
Especially,
the stigma.
yeah, especially with unreliable narrators. It really bothers me. It's something you will not see in my books.
Yeah.
If so, I would say like that's another, so a trope in thrillers and suspense is people with mental health issues. I'm not saying there aren't any of those issues in my book, but you're not ever going to have an alcoholic who forgets everything and actually ends up being the murder because they're an alcoholic or
Right.
something like that in my books. So that is something else that I guess is a little bit different.
Yeah.
A few people ask this question, so we can just kind of answer it now, as far as what if my book fits into more than one genre? And this is the answer I've heard probably a dozen agents give, is you need to pick one. Like, think of if you walked into a bookstore, which shelf would it be on? Because there is no shelf that is a fantasy thriller. So maybe your book is a thriller with fantastical elements, but you need to either pick one or the other
Mhm.
for your querying. And I have heard it really varies by agent. I've heard some agents say pick just the main genre and that's all I want to hear. I've heard others say, like my original version of my book was a thriller with romantic elements, is how I originally queried it. And some agents were totally great with that and some said, don't bother with that. So go
And
either
for a
way.
while, I queried mine as either contemporary fiction or literary fiction with themes in common with women's fiction. I don't think I was doing myself any favors.
Yeah, probably
I
not.
think that, and this is, I don't know, this was so interesting to me. I think that when I finally came around to just calling it women's fiction, then agents who represent women's fiction looked at it, thought about it as women's fiction, and was like, oh, this is great for women's fiction, rather
Yeah.
than being like, oh, I don't represent literary or or whatever.
Hmm. Yeah, totally.
Um,
And I
So
think like in the case of your book, so don't ever lie in a query letter, but Sarah could have queried someone who only represented literary books,
oh, I
and she
did.
could have called it, yeah, she could have called it a literary novel.
Yeah.
And then she could have queried someone who only represents women's fiction, and could have called it a women's fiction novel. So
And this is
sometimes you can kind of,
again coming back to the fact that there is not a literary fiction section in the
yeah,
bookstore. There is not a women's fiction section in the bookstore. That's a little bit different when you get into fantasy
yeah.
versus suspense, you know. I guess my feeling is when you're writing the book, write whatever the fuck you want, you
I
know.
have mixed feelings on that though, because if I did,
Really?
yeah, because what I wrote, I did that, right?
Yeah.
And then I had a book that was in two genres, and I got several rejections that basically they didn't state it as eloquently as that, but like that's what was going on.
So do you wish that you had done something differently?
I wish I knew a little bit more what genre norms
Mm. Mhm.
were, and I'd read a lot by that point. Um, but the romantic element was so strong in my book, like the R&R I got was, I believe, largely based off of what happened in the second half of my book
Yeah.
when it switched to romantic suspense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would say write what you want, but also know what you're
Be
doing
aware.
unless you want
Yeah.
to have to heavily revise.
Right. And of course, this
You
is all
get to-
coming from a person who's probably, you know, I probably wrote 300,000 words to come out with my
Hmm?
76,000 word novel. So, yeah.
Which is so pretty.
And I'll probably use them for something else. But
Yeah, I guess know both sides of it and then do what works best for you. Like Sarah, like I don't know that if you had done more research into genre norms that it would have done you any favors when you were writing your book.
yeah.
Whereas for me writing my fifth book, Fool Me Twice, I knew exactly what the genre norms were and I wrote within those boundaries because
Mhm.
I didn't want to have to rewrite the second half of the book again.
Right, right.
This is good. It's actually like kind of two different ways to think about it. Kind of in the same realm of genre, we wanted to talk a little bit about comp titles. So these are comparison titles, and they're usually used when pitching your book, either in a query or I often see them also in Publishers Marketplace with deal announcements. So it is one, two, or three comparison titles that you state in your query letter to give the agent an idea of what your book will be like, whether that is based off of the plot, the genre, the way in which you write.
The voice, the
Yeah,
character, the setting. It can be so many things
yeah.
if you do it right.
So some of the general like rules for comp titles, which of course there are always exceptions, is that they should be within the last few years. So you shouldn't be comping something that is 10 years old. It doesn't really show the agent where your book currently fits in the market. However, there are exceptions. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but
So
sometimes,
in my query letter, I
yeah.
I said that I comped to a couple of recent books, and I said that my book was in the lineage of This Is Where I Leave You. So I was I felt like that was kind of a nod to the fact that that's an old book. It's like 12 years old by now.
Did you match it with a newer book?
Yeah, so I used two newer books, and then that was the last.
Oh yeah. If you have a great comp title that's a few years old or a decade old, go ahead and use it, but match it with something that came out within the
Yeah.
last couple of years. I'm sorry, I have to stop for 1 second. My kids making noise and the monitor's of course not working.
Aw.
Sorry
Um,
everyone, I had to look at the baby monitor, which was of course not working. We just switched to sleeping in a big girl bed, which is actually going really well, knock on wood.
it's very exciting. We are coming to you at nap time again today.
Yes. The other thing you can use are non-book comp titles. My third book was called Lady Justice, and I used Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is both not a book. Well, I think it is now, but it was, I don't know. I used the movie is the point, and was also older. But I combined that with the book that had come out in the last year or two, both to show where it fit in the literary market, but also to show something more recent.
Mhm. You can say like my book has this quality of this book and that quality of this TV show. It doesn't have to be like my book is really, really similar to this other book.
Yeah.
Um, it can be like my book, I said my book has the something like the quirky voice of Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine.
Yeah.
Um,
You had
and
great titles.
I just wanted to put that out there because that's a really, really voicey book. You're like really deep in the narrator's head, which is what I did. But other than that, my book and Eleanor Oliphant don't have a whole lot in common.
Yeah.
So, but it worked.
One of the questions we get a lot is where to find comp titles. And I felt like this was very hard for me when I first started using them. I actually, there's an agent who would do query critiques, and for an extra $10, she would like find a few comp titles for you.
Would have
And
paid that.
I totally paid someone to do that for me. And looking back on it now, like it was helpful because it kind of gave me insight to what someone else's opinion was. But at the same time, she only read my query letter, not my whole book. And she didn't really have a sense of my voice. So I would say it's really good if you can find your own comp titles. One thing that helped me a ton was just reading more in my genre. I know that this doesn't always work. Some people have books that are not easy to comp, especially if it's kind of something different. But I swore up and down I couldn't find comp titles. And then I started reading more in my genre.
And
And I have like 6 for my current book.
yeah.
Um,
So
so
here's a little trick that I used. If you have a Kindle, you can get the free sample, which gives you like the first couple chapters of a book.
yeah, that's a great
Um,
idea.
and I downloaded lots of free samples. And I would usually know within a chapter or so if it was going to be a decent comp and if I was going to want to read the whole thing.
Yeah,
Um, and I mean, I have 2 teenage kids, I have a full-time job, I have a husband with a disability. Like, I know I'm not supposed to say I don't have time to read, but I'm not willing to spend time reading books I don't love. And so that has been a little tricky.
yeah, and I
Um,
don't think you even have to read the whole book. Just doing what you did, I think.
yeah, yeah. So the books that I comped to, I did read the whole book, and I did feel like it, but it took me forever
Yeah,
to really get good ones. But anyway, that's just a way of being able to read through a couple chapters of a bunch of books on your own time, not at the bookstore, for free.
yeah, I think
Ones
that's,
that you feel like will be good comps and you will enjoy, then buy them,
yeah,
read them,
definitely.
and use them as comps.
Speaking of Kindle, one of the best things I did to find comp titles was to open a private browser window in my internet.
That's interesting.
So it keeps it from using like your history to search books. So if I just go into Amazon and search for a book, I get a bunch of advertisements that are for books related to my whole history of anything I've ever searched for on Amazon. If you open a private browser window and do the exact same thing, you probably won't be logged into Amazon, but that's fine. Search for books that you think are similar and it will suggest other ones that actually are similar
That
with
aren't,
like,
yeah, that aren't
yeah,
suggested based on your purchase history. Yeah.
or previous browsing history. That helped. And I also have had some great comp suggestions from critique partners and beta readers.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a
So
great question. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a
yeah,
great question for beta readers, for anyone who reads your book, um, to ask them, what other books does this remind you of?
I think that's everything we had to say about comp titles. We will go to questions then.
It's kind of my favorite part.
I know it's fun. Our first question is from Shu Jun, and she asked, get back to it here. Oh, of course it pulled me all the way back. Oh, if you're writing something dark and or depressing, how do you shake it off and get your mom head back on? Well, for me, I try to like schedule a little bit of extra time. So I write during my daughter's naps, and that's about 2 hours. So I make sure I have like 20 minutes at the end of that. to kind of get outside or go do something that makes me happy before my daughter wakes up. I realize that might not work if your kid's not taking naps though.
Mm. It can be tricky. I guess the first thing I want to say is, and this is not an answer even, is that sometimes you don't. I mean,
Mm.
I've just had tons of times where I'm like, I'm really deep in the middle of writing something, and I don't write a lot of dark and depressing, but I do write a fair amount of sexy, and that's
Yeah,
really
you do.
awkward too. Um,
My suggestion is writing at night after they've gone to bed for sex scenes.
It yeah. Um, but I just have had a lot of times where I'm like kind of like just, like gotta try and shake it off. Um, but ideally that's not what you want. And I think the only I mean I think for me probably the only solution to that is to give it a little bit of time and to do something different and have a little bridge. Um, give yourself a
Watch one of our shows.
you know, what's that?
Watch one of our shows.
Which one of our
They're
shows?
cheerful.
um, take a walk around the block, do a pretend commute, you know,
Smart.
um, do dishes, just whatever to give yourself um, time to come down from that place that we go, that really intense place we go when we're writing.
I don't know where you listen to music, but on Spotify, they have many like pre-made playlists that are like happy. If music does it for you, you could try that too. So Alexis asked how to query a novel that is a genre mashup. We talked a little bit about this, but it's ultimately to pick where you think it would go on the shelf and just pick one genre. And you can say that it has elements of the other genre in it if you are so inclined.
Mhm. And the thing is, your query letter should show that. If you decide that your book is suspense and you pick that because you feel like you have to pick one, your query letter will show what the other elements are. You know,
Yeah, that's a good point.
if you have a strong romantic element in your book, that's going to appear in your query letter. Um, and so I think it's just a little, it's kind of orienting the agent to where this book is going to fall. And then they can sort of think, oh, this has romantic elements. Where's how's that going to fit in? You know, they're
Yeah.
smart people.
Kathleen asked a question, genres and subgenres. I'm writing a domestic suspense, or is it psychological suspense, and how to decide? Because honestly, it is both, but I need to decide one way or the other for querying. So agency that I'm confident about what it is. So it's kind of a hard question because it can go either way, especially if you have elements of both. You could just say it's a suspense novel. You do not have to specify that it's one or the other. I find domestic suspense usually is looking more at just the elements between the people involved and their relationships. Like it focuses more on that. Psychological suspense often is really focused on trying to trick the reader, in my experience. So at the end, there's often like some big reveal, and domestic suspense can also have that, but psychological suspense weighs more heavily towards that versus focusing as much on the relationships, like between a husband and wife is most common what we see in domestic suspense. So I hope that helps a little bit. Feel free to DM me about this and I'm happy to hash it out with you. But you can also just query it as suspense. You don't have to get that specific. The agent will kind of see where it falls, and when you get signed, you can have that conversation.
Okay, pause for a sec. I got to ask Bobby something.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Sorry about that.
Are you okay?
Yeah, we forgot to go get our daughter. We're not too late. He'll be about 10 minutes late.
That's hilarious. I'm sorry, but that's hilarious.
One of my favorite questions lately came in a couple of days ago. We just went scrolling through the Moms Writers Club hashtag and we couldn't find it. So we're sorry because it was great. But it was basically what's your mom hack to buy yourself a few extra minutes of writing time? So
Well,
go.
mine is to wake up really early, which is probably not helpful. helpful. The other thing I do is I give my kid her, if I really just need like 20 minutes, I let her have her iPad in our office, which she doesn't get to sit there very often, like in the office. And I give her my special office chair, and
Mm.
she gets to play a game on her iPad or watch a show for a few minutes in a special place, usually while eating a special treat.
Ooh,
I'm
yeah.
doing all the things I'm not supposed to be doing. I'm giving a kid screen time and also giving her like a treat, rewarding her with food.
I don't buy that whole like
It makes her happy though, and it works.
supposed to do, not supposed to do. I
And she's
mean,
a happy, well-adjusted, healthy child who gets tons of activity, and
yeah.
it's fine.
So, so okay. So I have a few answers to that, and they may not be the ones that you want to hear. But piggybacking off of what you said at the very end there, lower your standards. Um, so your kid has some screen time and a treat and gets to use the office chair. Like, I actually think she's going to look back and she's going to remember those times.
Yeah.
She's much older and she's going to be like, oh, those were the best times ever. I got the chair and I got, and you're not going to melt her brain with 20 minutes of iPad time. So I don't know. Get step back from this whole like perfect motherhood thing. Like step back from the ledge. Like that is ridiculous. That will suck up all your time and it's not necessary. Um so there's that. So tolerate mess. Um
Oh yeah. Check.
just suck it up and tolerate it. What's more important, the little pile of laundry in the corner or the writing that you need to get done? The writing that you need to get done is more important than that.
And it will make you happier.
It will make you happier, and you will not look back on your life in 10 or 20 years and be like, "Oh, I really wish I did that little pile of laundry." You know? You're going to
You
be
will
like
if you wrote that
you're going to
book.
be like, "I'm fucking awesome. I wrote a book." Okay? So there's that. Um I am also a big fan of teaching kids to do things themselves, even when they're really little, like their laundry.
Yeah.
Um, teach kids to do their laundry. They can learn it really early. I think my kids were doing their laundry. They were in grade school. They were, fourth grade,
I
third,
agree.
fourth grade.
And it gives a child an opportunity for independence, just little pockets of independence.
Yep.
So my daughter helps with laundry, and for her at 2.5, that means she literally just throws her laundry, and she barely can reach it, and she
Hmm.
throws it in. But she is so pleased with herself that she can
Yes.
do that, and she thinks
And
it's the
they
best
will
thing.
get over the novelty. And then they will not want to do their laundry anymore because they're over it. And you really got to stick to your guns. And you're like, nope, you know how to do your laundry. You're going to do it yourself. I'm not going to start doing it for you just because you're bored of your laundry. I got to
I
go.
will say also, as someone who did not learn to do her own laundry, because in my defense, my dad would not let me because he was like the laundry master or something. But when he remarried, um, my stepmother was very insistent that we learn to do laundry, which was good because I was 17 and getting ready to go to college, and I had never done my own laundry, and I certainly could have,
Yeah.
and probably would have actually preferred to.
Make it so they can fix their own snacks. Even when they're little. And if that means that there's peanut butter all over the counter when they're done, like no big deal. You can wipe up the peanut butter later when you do the dishes, but right now you need to write.
Emma's too, and she knows that it's okay for her to go in the refrigerator, and there are certain things that are set out that are easily accessible for her. She can get string cheese, she can get pieces of fruit. We have like the little packets of goldfish out, and she feels totally comfortable grabbing them. And I do have to help her with that still, but that's fine.
And again, the double bonus of independence,
Yeah.
and making your own choices. I have definitely seen tweets where moms feel like they are just snack machines, you
Yeah.
know?
And that's still going
Um,
to happen sometimes. There are some times that my
yeah.
daughter's like, no, I really need a pancake right now.
Right.
Nothing else is going to make her happy. This isn't like a perfect solution. And don't feel
No.
guilty if you do these things because, but if you're looking for little pockets of time, this stuff adds up.
Yeah, it really does. Um, Don't fold small children's clothes. Like, that's just insane. They're going to pull them out of the drawers and throw them all over the room. I don't fold my teenagers' clothes. Well, they do their own laundry, but sometimes when I get a basket of their laundry, I basically put their clothes in a pile and say, "Would you take these up to your room, please?"
And if you're
Because
still
they're going
doing
to wind
that,
up all over the floor anyway.
yeah. And if you're still doing that as an adult, it's okay. I do it
But
too.
if you're looking for time to write, no, this is not about like judging what you do as a parent. These are just like, this is like if you need time to write. Um, and I guess I'm glad you said that because it brings up the underlying issue, which is priorities, and that it can be really hard as a mom or as a parent to prioritize your writing and prioritize your creative life to the degree that it probably needs. Yeah. And it means choices. It means you
Yeah.
got to choose between multiple things that you really want to do. Like, you can't do all of them. Like, of course you want to have a beautiful, sparkling clean house and children that never lay an eyeball on a screen, and you want to write a novel, but I don't know.
Anyway, thanks everyone for joining us today. Please send us your questions. You can drop them below here in the comments. You can send them to us on Twitter. I am at author Just Payne.
And I am at SarahFinn11. And be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel and join us on the Moms Writers Club hashtag on Twitter. It's there's some nice activity going on there all the time right now. And every 2 weeks we get together and have a contemporaneous chat, which are really fun.
Yeah, you can find the next one if you go to my profile. I always have it as the pinned tweet, so you can check it out there. Anyway, bye.